I'm Dan Ginden, and this is A Day in the Life. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at people who have some really interesting jobs. Now, we're not saying that you don't have an interesting job, but let's face it, these are just a little cooler. That's why we put them on TV. Today, we went back in time, sort of, to Sturbridge, Massachusetts, to see what a day in the life is like at Old Sturbridge Village. If you grew up in Massachusetts and attended public school, chances are you recognize this place. It's where the past meets the present. And according to the people who make it run so successfully each day, it's a necessary education tool for all interested visitors, not just busloads of kids.
Old Sturbridge Village is it's a special place, and it's something that will warm your heart when you come here. There are people here who will help you understand the early 19th century. There's this wonderful landscape, and you can use that landscape throughout the year. There's a lot of different kinds of things that you can experience here at Old Sturbridge Village.
I think people come here for the simplicity of it, for the calmness. They're looking for, and we're all looking for something. They're looking for something. They're looking for times that were simpler. I don't know, no electronics, no cars running you over, horses perhaps. It's just quieter. I don't know how else to put it. And it's mostly outdoors, which I love the outdoors, so it's perfect. And a lot of people come here just to walk, so we have a lot of walkers, and they come for the trails.
It was in 1946 that the Wells family founded Old Sturbridge Village.
Fairly well-to-do, and they were collectors of antiques and artifacts, and decided that they wanted to start collecting buildings and put those in a spot and have costumed historians interpret those items and do things that were starting to, already in the early 20th century, go by the way.
In the 1980s, when most of the Wells family had died off, a nonprofit took over that was created to maintain the essence of this early 19th century location. Our first stop on this beautiful early fall morning was to the potting shed, where Jeff Friedman was busy making pottery. Lots of pottery.
Well, I started here 40 years ago. I was a student at a local university where they had a museum studies program, and one of the sections was with Mystic Seaport and another section was with Old Sturbridge Village. So I came here as a student. And I left after a period of time and raised a family, and now I'm back. Been back for quite a while, but I love working here, so. And we switch around. I'm the potter today, and I'm the potter very often now, but over the years, I probably worked at every exhibit in the village.
What do you like most about the job?
Well, I mean, I came here with an interest in history, and the idea that you could teach history not necessarily just through books and primary reading source materials, but I really enjoy the idea that you can learn about this from the sights and the sounds and the smells, and a very visceral type of history. And I think that interface with visitors and the activities that we do, and I don't think there's any better way to learn what it was like to live in 1830 than to walk behind an ox cart and see the actual rhythm of the work, how slowly an ox walks out to the field, and how much weight it can pull, and how hard that is for the farmer to work with a team. Same thing in here, just watching a pot being made. I think it says so much about the time that we're showing. This is just a small business that a farmer would do on the side, nothing artistic. mixing bowls and cooking pots and storage jars. Do this as a farmer working on the side. On a rainy afternoon, maybe a morning when my children got the chores done, come in here and make some pots. A big part of my job wasn't actually shaping the pots. It was digging the clay and hauling it back and preparing the clay, cutting firewood for the kiln, making the glazes. Shaping the pots was just maybe a third of the job, and I was doing that around my farming. But I have a large kiln, can fit about 800 pots in there at a time, and my goal each year is to fill that kiln at least once. If it gets down to being a choice between getting my hay in the barn or pottery in the kiln, I'm going to get hay in the barn. This is my second job. A lot of us farmers in this town would have second jobs, second incomes.
Sarah Ramsey and her cow were a big hit when we arrived at the barn. She was milking a cow and talking about what she was doing.
You know what this is? It's an udder, right? And the udder is full of milk. So think about 4 big water balloons that are full of milk. And each of these are called teats. And teats have little tubes in them, so think of them like straws almost, right? And the straws, each here, connect to one of those big water balloons. And so, if I take this and I squeeze from the very top and pull down, I get milk out of it.
He likes to eat.
She does like to eat.
How
Yeah,
long
she
will
likes
it
a
take
lot.
you to milk her?
It depends. I'm stringing it out a little bit. I can do it two-handed if I wanted to.
Yep. How long are you
Usually about 15 minutes or so. We're talking to Bonnie right now. This is so wonderful cow Bonnie.
So
and she
a
has
half
had
of
1.5 gallons.
1.5 gallons. Yeah, believe it or not. That's a lot of milk from her. And you can see I probably almost got a gallon already. So I've got a lot of milk from her, nice and creamy. And do you know what we're going to be doing with this milk? Can you make any guesses?
I'll make cream.
Making cream.
Water powered sawmill. We've got 2 water wheels down below the saw that are making that go down.
Next up was the water-powered sawmill, where we got to talk to Joe Halterman as he worked with his co-worker, Nick Wood. No pun intended.
And as you can see right now, we're cutting a log into lumber that might be used for building a house or a barn or any other repairs that farmers needed. And we have 2 water wheels that are down below the saw, using about 300 gallons a second to power this. It does take quite a bit. And in fact, in the 1830s, these kind of mills mostly ran in the late spring and late winter and early spring because it took quite a bit of water. And also the people running this would have been a farmer. This would have been something that a farmer would do. And certainly by late spring, by summer, you're really too busy in your field to do a lot of cutting. So these were pretty seasonal, but farmers in the area could have dragged their logs to the nearest sawmill, and we would basically cut the wood into lumber, charging by the foot. It was really a service. So if you wanted lumber, you couldn't go to the lumber yard like we do today. You really had to bring the log yourself. That was how this usually worked.
All towns needed a sawmill. If they didn't have one, then farmers would have had to cut their wood by hand, which would have made their already tough lives even more difficult.
The most dangerous part probably was moving the logs. So you could potentially be cutting logs up to about 3 feet in diameter. Very big logs, and in the old days, this was usually a one-person job running this mill. And I think the most dangerous part would have been having to roll the logs up by hand onto the carriage. And actually, once it's on there, as long as you don't go near the saw when it's running, use your common sense, it's actually safer than modern sawmills, because we're only cutting at the fastest we can cut is 3 feet a minute. So it's as long as you keep your wits about you. But it also would have been a one-man job, which potentially pretty isolated, so it could potentially be dangerous, but yeah, that's the way it was back then.
So the other end of it was the box, like he's holding on one end.
At the blacksmith shop, Rob Lyon and Jay Millen were hard at work. While Rob was working on horseshoes and other items, Jay handled the instruction with the pint-size inquisitors.
Take 2 hands and see if you can bend that.
No.
Why not? Is it hot?
No.
Oh, so when steel is cold, it's strong, right?
Yes.
Oh, so when I heat that up, I'm going to bend it with my pinky. All right, my metal is almost ready for me to bend it with my pinky.
Do you make like weapons?
No, that's a weaponsmith, sir. Now, watch. With just my pinky.
That's because you're older. Now you can pretend you're a superhero.
Do you know why it bent?
Because go to the fire.
Because it's hot and squishy. Right. Now I need to straighten it back out because I don't really need that bend. So let's see. Do I need a hammer to straighten that? Just to get it evenly straightened and hit exactly where I want to. All right, now can you touch that? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Let's see. What happens if I touch that?
Fire!
So I don't want to touch it, do I?
No!
So let me cool it off so it's not hot anymore. There you go. It's not glowing anymore. Is it still hot?
Yeah. Probably.
How do you know?
Somebody gets the wire.
This is the other one.
Oh.
Oh.
Okay.
So, look.
Over on the Freeman farm, fire was being used in a much quieter and less violent way than it was in the blacksmith shop. Ann Fisher was handling the cooking, which for today meant a lot of apple and squash cutting.
We are baking something called apple pudding, and except we had some leftover lovely Bartlett pears. And so we cut those up first, and they weren't quite enough. So what we did is added some apple, and this is a heritage brand called a sheep nose, otherwise known as a black gillyflower. It does sort of look like the end of a sheep, and so we have a combination of apple and a pear, and we're going to put them in a pie crust and cook them in our what you might call a Dutch oven. We call a bake kettle. And so what we're going to do is take some coals out of the fire and put it on the hearth, and put the bottom of the kettle there, and then we're going to put our pastry in, and put the lid back on, and put more coals on top, and that will give us about a 350-degree oven. And so that's how we're going to cook the pudding. And the other thing we're doing today is we're going to be cutting. We're going to be hanging up with a needle and thread some pieces of Boston marrow squash, and so we're going to hang it up here as we've done with our apples. And if you leave it up here until it totally dehydrates, that's the way of preserving it.
Is the great abundance of flies making you lose your appetite? Ann says that if you lived back then, you didn't like it much either.
Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Do what we may, summer will bring its flies." And people did note in their diaries that there seemed to be more flies this year or less flies. But the major problem is that we don't have the technology to be able to afford screens for our windows, and also living on a farm with the cows and the pigs. So particularly this time of year, the flies like the heat, so they come down the chimney, and then they stay because we've got food. So they are a nuisance, and people never like them. But as you can see, we cover the food, and not having a theory of germs, they didn't worry quite as much as we do today about them being a source of disease. And as I was saying earlier to the school children, you're much more likely to get ill from having a classmate sneeze on you than you are from a fly. But they are, as I say, I think we can all agree, rather disconcerting.
Ann, a Sturbridge resident, started volunteering at the village and has now been working here for over 19 years. While she enjoys spinning and weaving, Ann says, much like the visitors, the Freeman farm is her favorite.
The Freeman farmhouse is one of the popular places. I think the students here would agree, just because there's always something happening. We're either making cheese, or we're cooking, and we have the milking the cows, and just that there's so much stuff to look at. So I think that a lot of people say that the Freeman farmhouse is their favorite place.
Next time you decide to complain about the shocks on your car, perhaps you should hop into the nearest stagecoach first. This ride is bumpy, but it's another great way to immerse yourself into the 1830s. Stagecoach driver George King says these bumpy and uncomfortable rides were frequently only for those with deeper pockets.
It would cost you $6 to go from Hartford to Worcester. At that time, if you had a very skilled job, you might make $1 a day. Your luggage was extra, same as flying today. Lack of personal space and baggage fees isn't a new concept that the airlines came up with. Mostly businessmen. It wasn't cheap, kind of like airlines today.
And you can forget about speed when you're getting from one location to another. Back then, a typical trip from Hartford to Worcester took 12 hours. And that was at a whopping 10 to 12 miles per hour.
The stage line would maintain the stage. The driver was usually a 17 or 18-year-old kid driving somebody else's horses. They were responsible for driving the horses, changing horses at stops, and they'd actually have to jack up the stagecoach and grease the axles with tallow, sheep fat, every day. Like I said, the driver would be 17 or 18-year-old boy driving somebody else's horses in most cases. And they'd be fined a day's pay if they're an hour late with the mail at the end of the day. People haven't changed that much. Think of handing your keys to the most responsible 18-year-old, and tell them they're not getting paid for a 12-hour day if they're late.
For George, driving the stagecoach was a family business that he is happy to share with Old Sturbridge Village.
I've had horses here a little over 30 years. My father had horses here before that.
Not many people always had enough money to buy what they needed, so bartering was used as a regular means.
A trip to a store could be a major event for that season. You're going to bring things to trade. You're not just picking up 3 pots. You're picking up the broom that you wanted and getting the new, supply of grain that you could only get there, and a few ingredients for your workshop. And so you expected to spend the day going to the store and making the transactions.
What were the general stores like back then? Check out the Asa Knight General Store.
And it's pretty much a dry goods store. There's no way to preserve food at this time, so what we have are clothing material, hardware, china, spices, things like that. And when you come in here, you usually pay on a credit system. You don't use cash very often, but you may bring in cheese and butter, things of that type. I'll mark them up and sell them in the city, but you get credit for bringing them in. Then you could charge against that credit to buy things in the store. We're dealing with every country in the world at this time except Japan. Japan is closed. Doesn't open up again until 1853, Commodore Perry. But big trade with China, England, and of course England. 70% of everything in the store is coming from England. And half the value is right over here in the clothing material, because the people are making their own clothes pretty much. And we have an odd way of packaging things here. This is a set of tableware. It's a set of 6, 5 sets inside, 1 set outside. Truth in advertising. And at this time, the people don't eat off the fork, they eat off the knife. Here's a little poem to help you remember that. I eat my peas with honey, and I've done it all my life. It makes them taste quite funny, but they don't fall off the knife. And when you set your table at night, you put the knife on the right-hand side, because people most often ate with a knife. Takes care of everybody in the town. They don't come to the store more than 5 or 6 times a year. They're too busy on the farm. Sunday they come to church. The rest of the time, too busy.
Thruce Hammer retired back in 1986, but still wanted to do something. He came to Old Sturbridge Village with his college degree in history and has since been a fixture.
I like the people I work with, I like the job, I like the visitors who come in here, and it's a great exposure to the history of the country, really.
Our next stop was to see Walter Young. This former high school teacher has been with the village for over 18 years. While he is firing rifles today, Walter, like all the costumed historians at Old Sturbridge Village, is a jack of all trades.
I've been a blacksmith, I have been a cooper, making wooden barrels and buckets. I've been a potter, a shoemaker, I have been a banker, a lawyer. I played a rich farmer and also a storekeeper. This thing that I just fired is sometimes called a musket. It is also called a muzzle loader, but it is also called a flint lock. This item right here that I'm touching with my little finger is a piece of stone, a piece of flint. And when it contacts this piece of steel or frizzen, we get a spark, usually. And the spark sets off the powder that I have out here in the pan. When that explodes, some of it goes through a small hole into the powder that's in the breech, and when that explodes, it pushes the bullet out. So, what we have here then is this flint is held in a mechanism called a lock. And of course this part is the stock and this is the barrel, so you have the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. That's where that comes from. The other little expression that you sometimes hear is that right now the lock is back to the first click or at half cock. And if I pull on the trigger, nothing happens, so don't go off half-cocked. Nothing will happen. Now, to this particular weapon that I have here is a reproduction of an 1816 model. This one says Harper's Ferry on it, but some of them said Springfield Armory. They were made in both places. The musket is like a shotgun. It's a smooth bore. It's not rifled. The bore is 0.69 inches, so therefore it's a 69 caliber. All right, fairly good sized. But that was the 1813 style. Because it is a smooth bore, when I put a round bullet in there, it's not all that accurate because it just sort of tumbles when it comes out. This is a cartridge. It's a paper tube, and normally I would put a lead ball in the bottom and then the correct measure of powder, roughly 90 grains is what was used. And I do not have a lead ball in there today because, as some of you know, there's a boat ride down below here. Those people get all excited when we shoot at it. So there's no bullet in here today. So to load this, because my hands are occupied, I bite off the end, pour a slight amount of powder into the pan, close the frizzen, pour the powder down the barrel, and now normally the round ball would be left inside there. 0.69 inches is the diameter of the inside of the barrel. The ball is about 0.65 inches, so that little difference is taken up by the piece of paper to make it fit in there fairly tight. So now I'm going to ram it all the way down, and then I'm going to remember always to put the rod back in place. Don't shoot the rod. You don't have a second chance then. All right, let's see if we can't make another explosion here.
Have you ever fired guns before you started doing these demonstrations?
When I was in the Army, I spent 4 months on the rifle range as a rifle instructor.
Okay.
So that, yeah, you might say yes.
Yeah, you got a little experience.
Got a little experience, yeah.
One of the last stops from the day was at the grist mill, where we saw our old friends Joe Halterman and Nick Wood from the sawmill. I told you these costume historians were multi-talented.
Corn and oats, and so that's today's job. Now, if you had been a New Englander of the 1830s and you saw us grinding oats, you would have known that what we were grinding is not for humans, it's actually an animal feed. People in this part of the country at this time really didn't eat oats. That was a cultural prejudice at the time. They considered it to be food for horses and cattle. So this is actually going to be for the animals, and once we start grinding some, I'll let you see what it looks like. You'll see it's going to be very coarse. If we were grinding for humans, we could grind it into a fine meal to make your bread or pie crust. And actually there's a screw called the hindering screw in the corner here. What that does, turning that raises and lowers the top stone above the bottom stone. We can control how much space is between those two stones. That controls how fine or coarse the grind is. So my associate on the other side of the room is working hard, turning a crank. It takes a little while, but that will eventually lift up a gate outside, and water will start hitting the water wheel. And the way this particular water wheel works, there are buckets on the side that the water fills up, making one side heavier. That side starts to fall, it's starting to turn right down in fact. And then the more buckets fill, it's really the weight of the water that turns the wheel. Down in the basement is a shaft and a series of gears that take the power to the top stone, the runner stone that you can see turning. And the way this works, we put the grain, the corn, and the oats into the hopper, this bin. It then falls down to the shoe, and there's a square peg that is, as it turns, it shakes the shoe back and forth. And what it's going to do is shake just a little bit of grain at a time into the middle of the top stone. So we don't want too much going in, it would clog it up, we just want a steady stream of grain. And that's what you can see, it's starting to feed in, and then from there it gets pushed into the space between the stones, ground up, pushed outwards. There's about a 3-inch space between the outside of the stone and the inside of this wooden cover. The ground up grain will blow around in that space. If the wheel's spinning, it creates a bit of a breeze. And then the only way for it to escape is right here. There's a hole in the floor, a meal pit. And then from there we will scoop it up and send it to wherever it's going to wind up. In this case, out to the barn for our animals to eat. And so I showed you what the grain looked like going in. Corn, oats, unground. You can see how it comes out. And so I mentioned before, this is an animal feed, and you can see it is actually very coarse. So what we want to do is just allow the animals to digest it by breaking through the bran. The oats just get kind of bruised. We're not making a fine powder, but again, if we were grinding for human consumption, we would put the stones very close, get a fine meal, corn meal, rye meal. But today for the animals, that's what we make. The horses, the cattle, they'll all get their stuff.
The grist mill, too, was run by farmers, and it wasn't something that was run every day.
Similar to the sawmill, this would run a few times a month in the summer, and then in the winter, you'd probably maybe run it once a month or maybe twice a month, depending on the need of the neighborhood around you.
Nick started as an intern, and then this history major found a regular job here, and he's loved every minute of it.
To get to experience something that happened so long ago and to get to bring it back to life for the kids and for everybody who might not get an opportunity to see something like this.
There is a strong sense of family around here. Some of it runs as deep as many years of employment together, while others, like Mary Wales, is actually bloodlines.
Yeah, at one point I had 3 daughters. At one point they all worked here. They have left one by one. One keeps leaving and coming back in a different form every time she comes back, but she leaves, she comes back, she's done security, she did maintenance, no, my oldest one did maintenance. She's an archaeologist now. But she's done security. I mean, she's done it all, and she's back again, and now her husband is here. But she met him here. So it worked. And there are people here that are married, that met here, that married later, or are working here and are married too. So it's a very interesting place. It's a family.
As the day drew to a close, we were able to reflect on how hard these costumed historians work in order to help you find meaning, pleasure, relevance, and inspiration in this outdoor history museum of old-time New England life. We want to thank everyone at Old Sturbridge Village for taking the time to allow our cameras in there. If you have any ideas for future episodes of our show, feel free to contact us by email. And to find out more about WMCT-TV, you can visit us on the web. I'm Dan Ginden. We'll see you next time.